guys, so death. So why am I doing a talk on death? Well, I mean, I think it's probably the most significant thing that almost certainly is going to happen to all of us, right? So every single person that's listening to this will almost certainly meet their end at some point in the future, right? I should say up front that I don't believe that is necessarily the case because technologies could be developed to, at least support longevity for thousands of years, right? And surely the goal of sort of biology and medicine is to preserve life, and I think that we'll figure this stuff out in the end, and we'll find ways of enhancing ourselves technologically, the transhumanist stuff, finding ways of manipulating the cells in our bodies, and so on and so forth. We will develop a kind of form of immortality, and then if we can multiply, travel into space, colonize galaxies, in fact, build galaxies, then we stand a good chance of averting sort of cosmological disaster, sort of asteroid strikes. There's a theory that about the reason we don't see any aliens, because given the expanse of just our galaxy alone, you'd expect there to be some intelligent life out there, right? But we never see any. Well, not officially anyway, the UFO stuff. I mean, I've offered my opinion on this, and I think these beings that people are witnessing are just already here, right? But that's another story. So, yeah, so if we can spread and multiply that, that's what nature seems to want us to do, right? So like a gigantic sort of cosmic flower sort of releasing its pollen into space, that's what we will look like, leaving planet this beautiful blue sphere in the sky, and in space rather, the sky of space, if you like. And we can spread out, we can multiply, and then within those colonies we can increase the lifespans of people almost endlessly, I think. And then you get into questions about what's going to happen to the universe. And there's been some recent very, very respected commentators saying they don't think the Big Bang theory is correct. I think that the universe has just already been. I think Roger Penrose is one that suggest, raise serious questions about the origins of the Big Bang. So if the universe has always been here, and we get to a point where we can kind of construct our own planets and solar systems and so on and so forth, there is no reason why human beings must die. But obviously we're a long way from that, right? So let's sort of bring us back down to earth a little bit and talk about death for us, right? These sort of upright apes living in what we call we're in now the 21st century, right? That sounds crazy, doesn't it? It sounds so futuristic. Wasn't Buck Rogers I know he was 23rd, right? But anyway, so I mean, what is death, right? So it's the cessation of the functions of a distinct organism, right? That preserve that organism's morphology. I mean that's it, right? So when a certain critical or enough sort of non-critical functions cease functioning, then that overarching sort of colony of sub-organisms, if you like. So we've discussed this before. So things like kidneys and hearts sort of look in some ways to be like separate animals. We know they compete for resources during embryonic development and so on. So, this collective, this kind of Portuguese man of war of humanness, perhaps that's taking it a bit too far. It ceases to be able to cooperate in such a way as to be able to support the existence of all of those cooperating entities, right? And so each one of those entities, which is dependent for its own survival on all of the others, or many of the others, we can do without our appendices these days, right? As an example, they can't benefit from that overarching sort of cooperation, and so the whole pile of Matthew, for example, will just sort of tumble to the ground and start decaying, right? And then it might just be worth saying at that point that the material from which I am currently constituted, which is kind of all the stuff that I've breathed in and eaten over all these years, and some of the stuff that I came with that my mum breathed and ate, that goes on to be consumed and regurgitated and digested and used in forming loads of other agencies, right? So, the stuff from which I am made kind of never really dies. Okay, so that's worth mentioning. So, to a large extent, I think the idea of death kind of depends upon the way we define our very identities and what it is to be a living, sort of self-organized creature like this. But I'm not going to go on about that just yet. So I thought what I'd do first is talk about particular metaphysical systems and what they might say about death, and then what that means for our interpretation and the way we perhaps could potentially feel about death, right? So first of all, take sort of physicalism as an approach. So with physicalism, you presumably would just say that death is just the end and that's it. If it is the case, as a physicalist might suggest, that consciousness is just an epiphenomena of an organized physical system that behaves according to various laws of physics, then that consciousness just ceases to exist outright. And so, the death of me is the death of my consciousness, right? Which is just an epiphenomena of the clockwork body that then starts decaying. So if that's the case, right? So let's just spend some time. I'm not going to criticize physicalism as an ontology here. I'm just going to look at the consequences of it if we believe it to be true. So it just means that the consciousness of Matthew, right, of this ape, just literally stops the moment my brain stops. Or even if there's some more nuanced kind of explanation for mind within a physicalist system, whatever that stuff that's necessary for it stops, right? So Mark Soames would say the reticular activating system, right? So once that's completely stopped, I stop, right? I think he said we feel our way into cognizance, right? So the first thing that happens with us is this feeling and of stuff, and then that feeling of stuff, that the stuff that comes in is sort of prioritized according to its significance to our situation, and then kind of ideas form around that stuff, yeah. And so all of that just ceases to exist. So if that's the case, how should we live? And the answer then seems to present, you end up sort of saying, well, we don't believe in God, we don't believe in souls, we don't believe in the fundamentality of consciousness, so we may as well just damn well enjoy life, but also be good according to some sort of humanist ethic, right? But this yeah, so then there's the question of whether we should worry about it or not, and let's be real here and say that we kind of all do. And it doesn't seem to matter what metaphysical system or religion or level of enlightenment or spirituality, all that, any of that sort of stuff, we all worry about it, right? Because again, it's the most significant thing that could possibly happen to us. But let's just consider indeed whether we should worry about it or not, right? So, physicalism is right, and my consciousness just completely ceases to exist at the moment of my physical end, then there's not, from that point of view, there is literally nothing to worry about, because then nothing can happen to me after that moment, right? Nothing can happen to me because there is no me in existence anymore. So much as that's true, we still worry. Right, so I mean, this is really interesting because, this question of whether philosophy is useful, whether reason's useful at all, we hope that it will give us some satisfaction or confidence in a certain position. And however much we reason about whether we should be stressing about death or not, we're still going to stress about it. And herein lies, I think, the fundamental reason for a fear of death in the first place, which is, and I think I touched on this earlier, but this idea that we, as an entity, a cooperating entity such as a human machine or human system, we have to stave off the second law of thermodynamics, right? And which is death. So it just makes sense for us evolutionarily to be afraid of death. Otherwise, we'd all be falling off cliffs. We'd be, like Mr. Magoo that actually gets killed. And so it makes sense for us to have this fear of death. But knowing that, if that is the case, that we just have this tendency to fear death as a physical animal, then again, that seems to be sort of almost give us more reason to try and ignore that, right? And say, well, that's just there because, in the same sense that you might have certain physical urges. You say, well, that's there because of human instinct, but we can still overcome it, right? The whole superego thing, see Freud. So, so the very reason we're here is the very reason we're afraid of death, right? Now, let's look to another thing here. And that is what looks like the sort of callousness of nature, right? I mean, perhaps for religious people, this might be the sort of callousness of God, I suppose. But, if you look at nature, and, this is something that Kastrup talks about, it's brutal. It's absolutely unyieldingly brutal towards the individual. Right? Just imagine, every time when you hear that crunch, when you step on a snail, I hate this, right? And then you try and tiptoe back to the house, and then you hear another crunch. And just the vulnerability of these mortal beings, and how easily sort of accidentally hurt and damaged and so on and so forth, that all of us are, right? And, there's this idea that, mortality means that we're going to die sometime in the future. But really, in truth, mortality means we can die at any time. And I think that, as persisting forms, as intelligent organisms, we know this. And this is why it sort of agitates us. But I just wonder if there is some means, through reason, through reflection, that we can come to terms with it. Both others dying and ourselves. And herein lies the other rub, and that's, death is tied up with responsibility, isn't it? Because dying means that we leave people behind, people that once depended on us. And so there's a certain amount of fear and anxiety associated with that as well, which is really, really interesting because, organisms, logically would just kind of take care of themselves. There's this whole selfish gene thing, and some, and the violent ape hypothesis that points towards kind of selfish animals, and yet we have such anxiety about dying and leaving, dependents without us and so on. So, so we have a kind of light cone that extends beyond our own lives, right? So nature doesn't seem to particularly care much about the death of individuals. So whatever nature is, we might think it's brutal and callous and so on and so forth, but it clearly serves to deliver something. And I think that what that thing is change and mutation and a sort of reuse and sort of upcycling. These persisting forms we call the species, they mutate over time in response to their environment. They get better at stuff. Look how we've got better at stuff, right? I'm putting better in inverted commas here because, there's a number of verticals we could look at there, being, morally better, technologically better, spiritually better, so there is no one final measure of better, but, we have kind of improved, and we can build spaceships that go off into space, right? I mean, that's the other thing that reminds me that reminds me of this. Death presupposes that time is a thing. Yeah. I mean, it sure looks like it is, but we know that looking at stuff doesn't necessarily give us the truth. Just think of the stick in the bucket of water, right? The stick looks bent, but we know it isn't, right? So the things the way things appear isn't the way things are. You've now got serious thinkers like Hoffman talking about this, and we just know for a fact that really perception, the world as we see it, we're just literally dealing with information from our own bodies. Those bits of information that our bodies deem significant, right, to our situation, our survival prospects. This is known, right? So the very existence of Matthew is a sort of convenient fiction of some sort. But this body, this tells itself, right? So when I think about death, I think, well, that's the death of Matthew, right? Because that's the thing that this sort of cooperative cares about and believes it should care about. And that brings in some deep questions about why the hell nature's doing this in the first place. And for me, that sort of just automatically opens the door to certain metaphysical explanations that some might consider mystical. So I'm not going to bang on about that now, but so much of this conversation, I think that this inquiry hinges upon our definitions of identity. It hinges on presuppositions. It depends on presuppositions about time and space, right? It supposes that I am a distinct entity in the first place. I certainly feel like one, but then that's what this particular collection of agencies needs to feel like in order to be able to sort of cohere and function.